Hello, my name is Dr. John Livingstone. I'm a clinical psychologist with Alpine Pediatrics. I specialize in treating children and adolescents. And today we're going to talk about parenting principles and behavior strategies for families. There's a few principles or a few goals that we have with this presentation. The first is we're going to identify what I call the rules of parenting. The second, we're going to discuss what does the child control and what does the parent control in that family dynamic, in that family functioning. The third thing that we're going to try to do today is identify some of the steps that parents can use to teach their children responsibility. Whenever we talk about parenting, there's a fundamental paradox that I want every parent to know about. And the paradox is this: as parents, we love our children more than they love us. Most parents are sitting there saying, yup, that's true, which is why sometimes kids say mean things, or sometimes they do things that might be quite mean that hurt us as parents. Well, we love our kids more than our kids love us. And they don't even know that. I'm not trying to say that our kids don't love us. They certainly do. But they likely won't ever know how much you as a parent love them until they have their own children, at which point this cycle will repeat itself. But as parents, we love our kids more than they love us. But they need us more than we need them. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm not just talking about, financial resources. Of course, we love our kids and they often need what we have, meaning they need our resources. They need our stuff, as I sometimes refer to it. They need our cooperation. In fact, in most instances, including things like respect or in terms of cooperation, they actually need what we have more than we need what they have. I used to joke with my kids and say, gosh, guys, you guys need what I have. Think about this. For example, if you don't clean your room, it might be a pain in the rear end for me to go in and clean your room. But if I don't cooperate with you, your life is going to get a lot more difficult. And that's okay. I come up with rules and expectations because I love you, because I care about you, because I want you to be a good person. Whenever I ask parents what their goals are, ultimately they'll come up with three long-term goals for their kids. They want their kids to be safe, they want them to be successful human, and they want them to be happy. In about that order. And because we love our kids, most of our rules that we have, most of our expectations that we have for our kids come from those three things: keeping our kids safe, helping them to be successful, and then helping them to be happy. Now, whenever we talk about this, I want parents to understand that there are some good rules of parenting. In fact, there are 4 rules of parenting. Rule number 1 is to take care of yourself first. What do I mean by that as a parent? Meaning, I want you to make sure that you are doing well, that you are taking care of yourself. Think of the last time you were on an airplane. When you're on an airplane, they go through a safety demonstration, and they talk about how if we lose cabin pressure, these masks are going to drop out of the ceiling. Now, the next instruction is really important. They'll say, if traveling with a child or another individual, make sure that you secure your own mask first. Now, why? The reason they do that is because if there is some kind of a problem, if I'm focusing on my child, for example, and I don't get my mask on, I might pass out, I might have some kind of emergency, and then not only can I not help my child, I'm now actually adding to the problem. So one of the first things that I always tell parents is I want you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first. The second thing that I want parents to do is to take care of the team. Now, who's the team? The team is whoever helps you to take care of your kids. For many individuals, that might be a spouse. Maybe it's a partner that they've got working with them. Sometimes it could be parents, siblings. Who's helping you to take care of your kids? That's the team. So make sure you're doing good. Make sure you've got a team that's doing good. Rule number 3, love your kids. For most people, that's not too hard. Sometimes we might have a tough time and not like our kids as much, but you gotta love your kids. As we talk, that's going to be an overarching principle that needs to be conveyed, is how much we love and care for our kids. We might really care for them, but if we don't tell them that, sometimes we think that they'll just understand it and absorb it, and they might not. Sometimes we might misinterpret and think all the kind things that we do, I go to work for my kids, I provide food for my kids, I provide toys for them, that the child's all of a sudden going to understand that, oh, that must mean that my parent really loves me. They might not. And so in saying love your kids, sometimes you have to be able to really demonstrate that in words. Hey, I love you and care about you. As we talk about some of the other principles in this presentation, I want you to keep in mind that we always want this aspect of I love you, I care about you to be pervasive. That's a critical piece. Interestingly, we've gotten to 3 rules of parenting. The first 2 don't have a lot to do with children. To take care of yourself, take care of the team. But the third one, love your kids. The fourth one is teach your kids. Sometimes teaching and discipline are synonymous. If you think about when you discipline a child, what are you trying to do? Well, you're trying to teach them, right? If you're disciplining them to get your own way because you don't like what they're doing, that's going to cause a problem for us. And so when we think about teaching kids or disciplining your children, again, you've got to have that aspect of love, but I also want you to be thinking the point of this is so that I can actually teach them. Why? Again, because I want them to be safe and successful and happy humans. So keep that in mind when we talk about the rules of parenting. Take care of yourself, take care of the team, love your kids, teach your kids. Now let's talk a little bit about the control dynamic, because in any parent-child relationship, there's a control dynamic that's there. My dear father used to tell me that raising teenagers is a lot like driving a standard transmission vehicle. You have a gas and a clutch, and with teenagers and young kids, you got to figure out the gas and the clutch. Sometimes there's more gas, sometimes there's more clutch. And when we look at that, we have to talk about what we can control. What do we control? What does the child control? I like parents sometimes to think of their families as kind of its own little country, okay? Where the parents are the government. Now, I would suggest that it's probably not a democracy. It's probably closer to a monarchy where mom and dad are making the decisions, and that's true. Parents, we're setting the rules, okay? And not only are we setting the rules, we're setting the consequences that come from that, okay? The children, they're like the citizens, okay? They're like the citizens in that they get to choose their own behavior. They get to decide, am I going to cooperate with this rule or not? And so as parents, we're going to set the rules, we're going to set the consequences to that, but we're going to understand that the child is going to decide, are we going to cooperate? Are we going to follow that or not? Some parents have a real struggle with allowing their children to make the decision to cooperate or not. Now, understanding that they get to choose whether to cooperate does not mean that they'll get to choose what the consequence is or whether there will be a consequence. Think about your own life, okay? When they build a new road, they post a speed limit sign. Does anybody come and ask you, what do you think the speed limit ought to be? Very likely not. There's some ideas, there's some standards where they'll choose what the most effective speed limit is. And they'll put that sign up there, and then you have a choice. Who's driving the car? Well, you are. You can decide whether you want to follow that speed limit or not. If you choose not to, you very likely don't have a choice on what happens next. Officer Friendly might be right there to pull you over, and he might give you a ticket, okay? But you still had a choice, okay? You might not have had a choice on what the speed limit was. You might not have a choice on what the consequence is, but you certainly had a choice on whether you wanted to cooperate with that rule or not. That's the same idea that I want parents to have in mind with their own homes. As mom and dad, we're going to set the rules. We're also going to set the consequences to that. But we're absolutely going to let kids know, hey, you can choose. Sometimes I would do this with my own kids. I'd say, buddy, I need you to clean your bedroom. And he'd say, oh, I hate cleaning my room. It's the worst thing ever. And I'd actually say, well, you don't have to do it. He'd say, really? I said, yeah. Then I'd smile really big and say, but if you don't clean your room, then I'm going to come clean your room. And you might not like how I clean your room. And I'll smile really big. And he'd, this is when he was younger. He'd go, are you going to come in and take my stuff? And I said, I might. Whoa, would I get it back? You maybe could buy it back from me. But if you want to have your room cleaned by 4 o'clock, that's great. But if not, then I'll come take care of it. But buddy, you've got a choice. I love you and care about you. Again, love you and care about you is going to be pervasive through this. I love you and care about you. You can choose. Okay? And that way we also avoid an argument. Because if they're, I don't want to clean my room. Don't. You don't have to. You're too big for me to make you. You have a choice. But there is a consequence that comes with it. Okay? So, in looking at that, there's a couple of stages of what we call moral development. Okay? Lawrence Kohlberg came up with stages of moral development when looking at children and adults in terms of how they think. One thing to consider is that children and adults do not think the same way. Sometimes we think that maybe a child thinks the way that an adult does, they just don't have all the information. I'm here to tell you that's not the case. And so as parents, we might try to reason, or we might try to explain something. And you know what? The child may not get that. They may not understand that. And so when we think about reasoning, there's a couple of stages of moral development that I want parents to know about. This first stage involves cooperation. Is the child cooperating with me or not? Some parents get really bothered if a child is not cooperating with them. They almost think, oh, now what do I do? They're not doing what I asked. Well, there's ways to manage that. But when we talk about this control, okay, we've talked about who controls what, then the next question is, who's going to be in control? As a parent, I'm setting the rules and consequences. If my child cooperates with me, they actually gain more self-control. Think about, again, your own life. You drive an automobile. If you obey the traffic laws, if you obey the speed limits, again, rules, laws that were not set by you, but if you obey them, you're pretty much free to move about the country. You can go where you'd like to go. But as soon as you stop following the rules, then all of a sudden, there's going to be consequences that are placed on your behavior. And those consequences may increase as our cooperation goes down. For example, you might get a ticket. Well, let's say you don't pay that ticket. You might lose your license. You might get your car impounded. You might end up in jail. Is your freedom, your personal freedom, going up or down? Well, in that case, it's going down. And that's the same thing that I want you to be considering with your child. If you cooperate with me, kiddo, then you're actually going to get more freedom, right? If you cooperate with me by getting your homework done, you're going to get more freedom to do the things that you want to do. If you're not cooperating with me, then your freedom's going to go down, because then all of a sudden I'm going to have to come up with rules, and I'm going to have to come up with consequences to help you manage your behavior. Ultimately, the goal is I want you, kiddo, to be managing your own behavior. I don't want to be the one managing it. I would prefer it if you did it. But if you don't, I'm happy to help out. So when I talk about these stages of moral development, this stage one is this place where kids aren't really cooperating. They're not following the rules. They're not living up to those expectations. Now, when that is the case, the most effective thing that we use to modify behavior is actually the use of a consequence. Why? Well, it's not to be mean. It's because consequences are so much more effective at changing behavior when a person is not cooperating with you than trying to talk to them about it. A lot of parents will try to talk to their child or explain to them why they need to do this or why this is important, and the child might know it. They might even agree with it. But if we want to change the behavior, then what we'll do is implement a consequence, because a consequence is more effective at changing the behavior towards cooperating than just talking about or explaining that to them. Okay? I was talking with a police officer once, and he was explaining this very principle. He had said to me, if we pull someone over for breaking a law, if we give them a ticket, a consequence, it'll be about 2 weeks before they break that law again. But our research has shown if we give them a warning, it'll be about 10 minutes on average before they're breaking that law again. So the whole idea behind this isn't to be mean, it's not to be harsh. The use of a consequence isn't to bend them to our will. It's to help them choose to change their behavior. They may not choose to, at which point another consequence might be used. The other reason that we look at use of those consequences and use of the behavior is because humans are more inclined to change their thinking to fit their behavior than they are to change their behavior to fit their thinking. Lots of people will try to explain and try to come up with reasons for why they should or shouldn't do this when using a behavioral strategy, especially when not cooperating with the rule, is going to be much more effective than trying to talk to them about that. So that's stage one. The place where I want you to be thinking is this kiddo cooperating with me or not? Because if they're not, that means as a parent, I'm probably going to have to do more things to primarily be in control. Now, let's say that child is cooperating with us, even if it's grudgingly. Hey, buddy, I need you to do your homework. Oh, I hate doing my homework. Fine, I'll go do it. That's stage two. Stage two is classically defined by cooperation, but not necessarily taking initiative. Control at that point is shared. Hey, if you're willing to do your homework, I'm not going to have to set a lot of rules and limits on when you're going to do your homework because you're doing it. I might say, hey, homework's got to be done by this time, but if they're doing it, great. Lots of parents are really happy for their child to be in a position of cooperation. If they're like, oh, this is great, this kiddo's cooperating with me, great, I'm done, I'm happy to be at that point. But I want kids to be at a point where they are they have a maximum amount of control of their behavior. And usually at this stage two where they're cooperating, it's about half and half. The third stage that I want people to be at is where they're actually taking initiative. What does that mean? Obviously, it means the child is still cooperating. They're still doing what they need to be doing. But now at this point, they're actually saying, but I did everything that I needed to make this happen. Okay? Primarily, the child is in control at that point. Okay? And as a parent, I'm in the role of being a consultant. I remember that same son of mine when he was a teenager. There was a new video game coming out, Super Smash Brothers. Most of the parents will know what Super Smash Brothers is. And he was super excited because he's like, Dad, this new game's coming out. I'm super excited. And you know what? My friends are coming over and me and the boys, we're going to take over the TV room. So I thought, well, I need to see if he's cooperating with me first. Well, buddy, tell me how we're doing on our grades. And he said, my grades are great. You know, I showed them to Mom earlier this morning. Mom didn't have to ask. He just went and showed. He said, I can bust out my phone right now and you can see them. Okay. How about your chores? Are your chores done? He's like, yep, I did all those this morning because I knew you were going to ask. He knew about the rule. And then I said, okay, what about the TV room? Is the TV room? Yep, Dad, I actually went and picked it all up, everything before I asked. We're going to get some pizza and do our thing. Well, what am I going to say? Of course, buddy. Sounds like you guys have it all figured out. Have a good time. If there's anything you need, let me know. Okay? So at this stage one, more behavioral strategies. Okay? Use of consequences. Stage two, when we have this cooperation, this is where communication, talking about things, is more effective. This stage three, where the child's primarily in control because they're cooperating and they're taking initiative. When they're at that point, I'm just giving advice as a parent. I'm just a consultant. So keep in mind those different stages. Now, let's talk a little bit for a minute about consequences and communication and consultation. Sometimes people associate the term consequence with a negative connotation or that it's a bad thing. I hear parents say that all the time. If you do this, you're going to get a consequence. Well, there's positive or good consequences as well, or desirable consequences. For many parents, for example, if you're employed, you go to work, you get a paycheck. Is that a consequence? Sure it is. It's just a desirable one. I want to specify a little bit when we talk about consequences, a few terms that you've probably heard, but I want to make sure that we're clear on that. One of those terms is a reinforcer. Sometimes we hear that in terms of positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. And then we want to talk about punishment, which is usually where people are associating that term of consequence with punishment. Okay? First thing I want you to know is that a reinforcer increases the likelihood of every behavior. So if I find a behavior that my child is doing that I want to go up, I'm going to reinforce it. So let's say they're kind to one of their siblings. Let's say that they clean their room. Let's say that they go and they get their chores done. I want that behavior to increase, so I'm going to reinforce it. Okay? Let's say there's a behavior that I want to decrease. Okay? There's a behavior, let's say they're mean to their sibling, or they're disrespectful, or they say hurtful things. These are behaviors that I want to decrease. If it's a behavior that I want to decrease, I'm going to punish it. Okay? Now, when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about good or bad. I'm just talking about behavior. And often when we do behavior modification, I want parents to keep a very business-like approach to it. I don't want there to be a lot of emotion. I can't believe you did this. I want it to just be calm, like, okay, well, guess what, buddy? We don't do this. Or, hey, buddy, you did a great job with this. And use a reinforcer or a punisher. Now, when we talk about positive and negative, when we're talking about positive and negative in this sense, we're talking about give something or take something. A positive reinforcer, for example, is giving someone something to increase the likelihood of a behavior. Okay? A negative reinforcer does not mean that we are reinforcing bad behavior. Negative reinforcement means I'm taking something to increase a behavior. Let's say I have an employee who works for me, and they do a great job on a project, and I say, great, man, you did wonderful with this. Thank you so much. Here is $100. I'm giving them something, that's the positive, to increase a behavior. That's the reinforcement, positive reinforcement. What might be more effective for them is a negative reinforcement. Again, I want the behavior to increase. You did a great job with this project. Thank you so much. Tell you what, take Friday off. I'm removing something, work, to increase the likelihood of a behavior. That's a negative reinforcer. Positive and negative punishers are talking about decreasing behavior. So let's say we've got an individual and she's mean to her little sister. I might say, oh, sorry, you did this, therefore you have an extra chore to do. I'm giving them something, a chore, to decrease the likelihood of a behavior. That's a positive punisher. I might take something away. Oh, sorry, sweetheart, you did this and that's not okay. I'm taking away your phone. That's a negative punisher. I'm removing something, the phone, to decrease a behavior. Okay? I want people to know about those things because what works best for your child is individual. Some individuals might want the $100 for doing a great job on the project. Some people might want the day off. Any type of consequence that we use, be it a reinforcer or a punisher, positive or negative, has to have three things. It's got to be frequent, it's got to be immediate, and it's got to be meaningful. That meaningful is a really important piece because sometimes people will think that they have something that's meaningful and it's not. And it doesn't have a big impact on the individual. Sometimes they might come up with a really meaningful thing. If you get straight A's, we're going to Disneyland. Well, that's great, unless it's October. And unless we're going to Disneyland all the time, and maybe we're not, it doesn't have that frequency or that immediacy. And you've got to have all three things. You've got to have it frequent, immediate, and meaningful to be its most effective consequence. Now, sometimes you might implement a consequence and have a child say, I don't care. That's okay. I don't want you to get super upset about that as a parent because we're not, as we implement the consequence, trying to be mean. We are certainly trying to be meaningful. Okay? The other nice thing about using a consequence or using these behavioral strategies is it doesn't require a lot of insight. Meaning, I'm not saying that the child has to understand this. When I implement a behavioral strategy, that doesn't mean that they will all of a sudden understand, oh man, I should have kept my room clean, or I should do that. That's something that will come over time. As they change their behavior, the thinking tends to follow with it. Okay? So I'm not expecting to have big insight the very first time, and I'm not expecting them to be like, oh, mom and dad, you got me now. But I also don't want parents feeling like, oh, well, we didn't land anything there, because that might take time, right? It might take time of implementing multiple consequences before the child understands, oh, this is what's going to happen. So they have to be patient there. That's consequences. Communication. When we're communicating with our kids, we talked about this before, I want it to always be with a, I love you, I care about you. Sometimes we can get pretty frustrated with our kids. Every parent knows that. But the best that we can do in trying to communicate, I love you and I care about you, but this is what's going to happen. It's going to be really, really important. I often will tell parents the process of how we share a message is almost as important as the content. In some cases, it's even more important than the content. Think about your own life. You know, maybe you had parents that got after you when you were a kiddo. I can certainly remember mine did. Do I remember a lot of what was said? No, I don't really remember much of the message. Do I remember how it was said? Yes, I do. Okay? And so when we talk about that, helping to convey this, I love you and I care about you, that we have this loving communication, but that's not going to change the consequence from happening is really, really important. And then being a consultant. If you think about your own life as an adult, maybe you've turned to other adults. Maybe it's your parents. Maybe you've had other individuals that have been a really meaningful person in your life. Did you go for them for advice? Maybe when you bought a car or bought a house, or maybe when you were working with kids, did you have other people that you trusted? At some point, as your children age, they're going to get to this point where they are cooperating with you and they are taking initiative. And maybe at that point, being able to give advice is a critical piece. So now, let's talk a little bit about how do we teach our kids to be responsible? How do we move them from this stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, where they're primarily in control? The other benefit to that for us is it's a lot less work. If you recall, when we had young children, they were a lot more work than when I had adult children. They're a lot less work. So how do I teach my kids? How do I move kids up to this progression of them being responsible? 4 steps that I like people to have. Number 1 is I give them a task that's right and reasonable. Now, what do I mean by right and reasonable? Meaning it's something that they can do. I'm not going to give them a task or something that is not reasonable. Hey, I need you to have the house painted by the time I get home at 5 o'clock. That is neither reasonable nor right. Now, in looking at right or reasonable, that doesn't mean that they're also going to engage in the behavior. Sometimes I'll have parents use what I call the 5K question. An old psychologist friend of mine taught me about this. And he said the 5K question is, if I walked in and offered this child 5,000 something, maybe it's $5,000, maybe it's 5,000 video games, maybe it's 5,000 toys, it could be a lot of different things. But if I walked in and said, I will give you $5,000 if you can have your room cleaned by this time, would they do it? I'm not saying, I'm not saying they can or can't. I'm just saying, would they? Okay? And it's got to be meaningful for them to take that. But if they could, we know it's likely to be right and reasonable. But also, pay attention to your own emotions as a parent. As parents, we get upset when children don't do something, not when they can't do something. If my child can't clean their room, I'm not going to get as upset as if they don't clean their room. And if I believe that they aren't doing it instead of can't do it, I'm going to get really frustrated. Right and reasonable suggests this is something that they can do. Okay? Step number 2, I want you to change your own expectations. Now, what do I mean by that? Am I advocating for reverse psychology? I'm not. In fact, reverse psychology is not very useful. What I'm saying is if I give the child a task that I want them to engage in, I want to change my own expectations as to whether they are actually going to do that task. My wife might ask, gosh, do you think they're actually in there working on that? And my response is probably going to be, no. I mean, it'd be nice if they were, but I'm not hanging my hat on whether they're going to do that. And I do that for 3 reasons, okay? If I change my expectation, then if the child doesn't engage in the behavior that I want them to, if they don't follow that rule, I'm not going to get super upset about them. Keeps the emotion out of it. 2, it's actually going to prevent me from nagging them. I'm not going to be going in there and saying, oh, buddy, remember you said you were going to do this. Oh, are you actually doing it right now? That's nagging. We might think that it's helpful to them, but it's not. And not only that, if I'm sitting there hounding on them to get that done, who's actually being responsible here? Are they or am I? Well, in that case, it sounds like I am. And the third reason I want to change my expectations is because I recognize they're going to learn something. They're going to learn something one of 2 ways. Either they're going to cooperate with me and life's going to continue on. There'll probably be a positive reinforcer because I want this behavior to go up, or there might be some kind of reinforcement, maybe a negative one, but there's going to be something there. Or they're going to learn by the other consequence. It might be a punisher if they don't do it. But either way, I'm giving them this task because I want them to be responsible. I want them to learn. And so when we talk about that, again, give them a task that's right and reasonable. Change your expectation. 3rd one, let the consequences do the teaching. The consequence is going to be a more effective teacher than the explanation. Here's a big one for a lot of parents. The actual consequence is going to be a much more effective teacher than even the threat of the consequence. Some people think that the threat of the consequence will get them to do something, but it's not that as effective as actually implementing the consequence. There was one time that my lovely daughter came home. Her grades were pretty low. That's an issue in our family. We expect good grades. We expect you to try your best. She was missing a number of assignments. So she walked in. I said, "Hey, sweetheart, I'm glad you're home. Yeah, how was school today?" We chatted a little bit, and then I said, "Your grades are pretty rough." "Well, I know. I had this or that going on." I said, "Okay, a lot of reasons. Tell you what, though, I'm going to need your phone." "Well, I need my phone to call my friends. They were going to help me with this." And I don't know. I don't know what you're going to need your phone for, but tell you what, I need you to pass me your phone because I'm going to hang on to it until these 4 assignments are done. Once these 4 assignments are done and you come and show them to me, I'll give you your phone back. By the way, take as long as you'd like. Now, one thing that works out really well with that is, you remember we talked about at the beginning, my daughter needs my cooperation more than I need hers. Okay? So what I'm doing is I'm actually taking the phone and letting her say, "Hey, take as long as you'd like. Once those are done, then you will get your phone back." I wasn't threatening to say, "Now, if they're not done at 9 o'clock, I'm going to take it." That's the threat of the consequence. Actually implementing it, pass it to me, and she did. Now, sometimes parents say, "What if they didn't pass you their phone?" I can do a lot more things besides getting the phone. I can, change the house Wi-Fi. I could call my phone carrier and I could have the phone turned off. There's a lot of things I could do. I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm certainly trying to be meaningful. And with her, I know that her phone is meaningful. So she passed me the phone. I held on to it. Actually, about an hour and a half later, she brings it. "I finished those 4 assignments. Let's look through them." I want to make sure they're actually done. Not that I don't trust her, I just want to verify it. And so we actually went through, looked at it. "Hey, that's great. You did it. Here's your phone. Thanks. I'll be checking your grades again." That's the frequent, okay? Immediate, frequent, meaningful, okay? Let the consequence do the teaching. And then step number 4, give the task again, which is why I said, I'll be checking those grades again and we will go through this again. So those 4 steps: give them a task that's right and reasonable, change your expectation, let the consequences do the teaching, and give them the task again. I hope that this has been helpful for you as you look at doing your best and helping raise your kids. I truly believe that your kids are yours for a reason. I think that you're the best parent that these kids could have, and keep loving them, but keep teaching them. If you run into struggles or you find, gosh, we're using some of these principles and strategies and it's still not working, well then feel free to reach out to a professional. We have a behavioral health team here at Alpine Pediatrics and we're more than willing to help.